Think you know the Old West? Cowboys, shootouts, dusty saloons, and legendary outlaws have filled our movies, TV shows, and history books for decades. But what if I told you that many of the facts you've always believed about the Wild West are nothing more than myths, exaggerations, or flat-out lies? From gunfights at high noon to fearless sheriffs cleaning up towns, the truth is often stranger and far less glamorous than the stories we've been told. So there you have it, 15 facts about the Old West that turned out to be totally fake. Which of these surprised you the most? Drop a comment below with your thoughts and let me know which Wild West myth you want me to cover next. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another tale from the real American frontier. Clint Eastwood and John Wayne helped cement our default picture of the West. Laconic, armed men striding wide, speaking slow, and cast as purely good or purely bad. We picture quick-draw duels, rolling tumbleweeds, and saloons awash in whiskey as the everyday backdrop of the 1800s cowboy era. But how much of that holds up under the historical record? Researchers note that frontier life was more ordinary and more regulated than movies suggest. Public gunfights were rare, many towns restricted carrying firearms, and most disputes ended in court, not in the street at high noon. Cowboys were working stockmen, not stylized gunslingers. Their gear was practical, and the trail crews were diverse. Mexican vaqueros shaped the craft, significant numbers of black cowboys rode the herds, and native and European workers were common. Even the scenery owes something to myth-making. The iconic tumbleweed is largely Russian thistle that spread late in the 19th century, not a universal symbol of every frontier town. Once you stack these facts against pop culture, the Old West looks far more complex. Learning what cowboys actually look like and how they lived can overturn assumptions we've carried for years. Number 1. Cowboys didn't fully load their pistols. In the Old West, revolvers were commonly 6-shot firearms, but surprisingly, many were carried with only 5 rounds instead of a full cylinder. This practice became known as the cowboy load. The reason had to do with the design of 19th century single-action revolvers. Unlike modern firearms, these guns did not have built-in safety features. A live cartridge resting directly under the hammer could discharge if the weapon was dropped or struck against something. For a cowboy riding long hours on horseback or working in unpredictable terrain, that was a serious risk. To avoid this, most experienced gun owners left one chamber empty. They would lower the hammer onto this gap, ensuring that if the revolver was jostled, it would not set off a round. This small precaution protected not only the owner, but also nearby people, animals, and gear. Historical records and firearms manuals from the 19th century confirm this practice. Colt's revolvers, for instance, were famous for their craftsmanship, but still carried this vulnerability. Gun makers at the time prioritized reliability and stopping power, but safety locks were not yet part of standard engineering. It wasn't until the early 20th century that transfer bars and modern safety systems were introduced, making it secure to carry all 6 chambers loaded. The cowboy load is a reminder that the Old West was not just about romance and legends. It was about practical knowledge and survival skills. Cowboys, lawmen, and settlers learned to respect the limits of their tools and adapt accordingly. By carrying 5 rounds instead of 6, they turned everyday wisdom into a standard that shaped frontier culture. Number 2, cowboy boots were designed with safety in mind. Cowboy boots are more than just a fashion statement of the Old West. They were carefully designed with safety and practicality in mind. Every feature had a purpose, shaped by the daily challenges of life on horseback. One of the most important elements is the high heel. This design prevented a rider's foot from slipping too far through the stirrup, reducing the chance of getting caught while riding. If a boot did slide too far, the absence of laces meant the foot could easily slip free, lowering the risk of being trapped after a fall. The pointed toe also served a functional role. Cowboys needed to move quickly and securely when mounting or riding, and the narrow toe made it easier to guide the foot directly into the stirrup without fumbling. This small but effective detail saved time and effort during long hours on the trail. Another key feature was the tall shaft of the boot. Reaching well above the ankle, It helped protect the rider's legs from brush, cactus, and even the occasional contact with livestock. The sturdy leather acted as a barrier, keeping cowboys more comfortable and less prone to injury during long rides across rough terrain. Historically, bootmakers in the 19th century adapted older European riding styles to meet the needs of cowhands in the American West. Spanish vaquero traditions played a major role in influencing the shape and build of these boots, blending practicality with regional craftsmanship. By the late 1800s, distinctive cowboy boots had become standard gear for cattle drivers and ranch hands, valued as much for protection as for identity. Number 3. Old West gamblers rarely played poker. When most people picture Old West gamblers, they imagine poker hands being revealed in smoky saloons. But historically, that's misleading. The most popular card game of the 19th century was faro, not poker. Simple to learn and fast-paced, faro drew crowds across frontier towns and became the mainstay of saloon gambling until the early 1900s. Poker did exist, but it was far less common. Only later, after faro declined, did poker rise to dominate in popular culture, helped along by Hollywood movies that cemented it as the classic Western card game. The truth is, if you walked into a saloon during the Old West, you were far more likely to find a faro table than a poker game. Number 4. A man who won a quick-draw duel was still tried for his offenses. One of the few well-documented quick-draw encounters of the Old West took place on July 21, 1865, in Springfield, Missouri, between James Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt. Popular culture suggests the frontier was lawless, yet this incident moved immediately into the courts. Hickok was arrested and tried for manslaughter. The dispute grew out of a gambling debt and a gold watch Tutt claimed as security. After public taunts and warnings, the men faced each other on the town square. Contemporary reports state each fired once. Tutt did not survive. At trial, the jury acquitted Hickok, accepting a self-defense argument rooted in his reasonable fear of imminent harm. The verdict did not declare that a gambling debt justified the use of firearms. It turned on the circumstances and perceptions at the moment. Historians often cite this case as an early, highly publicized example of the quick draw idea. Even so, such formal face-offs were uncommon on the frontier compared with the everyday legal, economic, and social routines that actually structured Western towns. Number 5. The period lasted only about 30 years. The period we call the Wild West was actually much shorter than many imagine. Historians generally place its beginning around 1865, after the end of the Civil War. This marked the start of rapid westward expansion, the rise of cattle drives, and the growth of frontier towns. By the mid-1890s, however, much of what defined the frontier era had faded. Railroads connected distant settlements, territories moved towards statehood, and stronger legal and political systems replaced the looser order of earlier decades. Taken together, this puts the time frame of the Wild West at roughly 30 years. It was a brief but transformative era, one that produced enduring legends, even though the actual historical window was relatively narrow. Number 6. Quick draw fights were much different from their popular depiction. The idea of the gunslinger is largely a creation of popular culture. Movies and television have shaped an image of the Old West, filled with dramatic duels and constant shootouts. In reality, these events were far less common than Hollywood suggests. Most towns had strict laws against carrying weapons, and disputes were more often settled in courts than in the streets. Even the term gunslinger itself is an invention that came much later. During the 19th century, individuals known today by that label were more often called shootouts or sometimes pistol fighters. The word gunslinger only entered widespread use in the early 20th century, well after the frontier era had ended. This shows how storytelling, novels, and films reshaped the Old West into something larger than life, turning occasional figures into legendary archetypes that were not recognized as such during their own time. Number 7. Gun control was stricter than it is today. It may come as a surprise, but the Wild West often enforced stricter firearm rules than many places in the United States today. Although popular culture paints the frontier as a land of unchecked weapons and constant danger, the historical record shows otherwise. Cowboys, travelers, and settlers did carry guns when moving through open country, where wild animals and isolation made them practical tools. But once they entered towns, the situation was different. Many communities, such as Dodge City, Tombstone, and Deadwood, required visitors to check their weapons with the local sheriff or at a designated office. In exchange, they received a token or receipt, which they used to reclaim their firearm when leaving town. These ordinances were not unusual. Town leaders wanted to maintain order in busy saloons, dance halls, and marketplaces. In fact, such local regulations meant that the frontier towns of the late 1800s often had tighter public restrictions than many modern American cities. What this reveals is that the lawless image of the West is more myth than fact. Behind the legends, there was a strong push for structure, safety, and community standards, even in the very towns we now imagine as centers of chaos. Number 8. Buckaroo came from a mispronunciation. The image of the cowboy that we recognize today is rooted deeply in Mexican vaquero traditions. In fact, the very word buckaroo has its origins in the Spanish term vaquero, meaning cowboy. Over time, English speakers unfamiliar with Spanish pronunciation adapted the word, and it evolved into the form we know today. Spanish phonetics played a role in this change. In Spanish, the V in vaquero is pronounced closer to a B sound, which made it easy for non-Spanish speakers to mishear and reshape the word. The result was buckaroo, a distinctly Americanized version of the original term. This linguistic shift reflects a larger cultural exchange. Many early cowhands in the American West were of Mexican descent, and their knowledge of cattle herding, horseback skills, and equipment design influenced nearly every aspect of cowboy life, from saddles and spurs to clothing and techniques on the trail. By the late 19th century, the vaquero heritage had become so entwined with cowboy identity that even English-speaking ranchers carried forward these traditions, often without realizing the Spanish roots. The word buckaroo serves as a small but telling reminder of how intertwined cultures shape the realities of the frontier. Number 9. Barbed wire helped lead to the demise of cowboys. Some historians argue that the invention of barbed wire marked the turning point that brought the Wild West era to a close. Barbed wire was inexpensive, easy to install, and highly effective at enclosing large areas of land. Once ranchers adopted it widely, the open range system, where cattle roam freely, quickly gave way to fenced pastures. With herds now confined, the traditional long drives across vast prairies became less necessary, reducing the demand for cowboys. While barbed wire played a crucial role, it was not the only factor. Many researchers point to the harsh winter of 1886 to 1887 as another decisive blow to the open range. Extreme cold and heavy snow took a severe toll on cattle herds across the West, devastating ranching operations and forcing a shift to smaller, more controlled methods of raising livestock. Together, these developments reshaped ranching life. Cowboys still existed, but their work evolved from driving cattle across open country to managing herds within fenced ranches. In this way, barbed wire and natural disasters combined to signal the end of the open frontier era, replacing the romantic image of the free-ranging cowboy with a more settled and regulated system of ranching. Number 10. The Old West Texas Rangers are one of the oldest law enforcement agencies. The Texas Rangers, often associated with the Old West, are not just a relic of history, they still exist today. First organized in 1835, the Rangers are recognized as the oldest state law enforcement agency in the United States, and in fact, in all of North America. Their origins trace back to frontier defense, when settlers needed a group that could move quickly, adapt, and operate with limited oversight in unsettled regions. In the 19th century, being a ranger demanded unusual independence. Candidates were expected to handle unpredictable situations, often far from superiors, and to make decisions on their own judgment. This ability to work without constant direction became a hallmark of the force. Over time, the Rangers shifted from frontier patrols to a more formalized role. Today, they continue as an elite division of the Texas Department of Public Safety, drawn from among the agency's experienced officers. The continuity of the Rangers, from their frontier origins to their modern responsibilities, shows how institutions of the Old West evolved while still maintaining a direct link to America's earliest state law enforcement traditions. Number 11. Saloon bar towels were not hygienic. In Old West saloons, it was common to see towels draped across the bar. These weren't for cleaning the counter, but for the customers themselves. Patrons often used them as community towels, wiping away the foam from their beer mugs. While the practice may seem unusual today, it was a standard part of saloon culture in the 19th century. Modern bar towels serve a very different role. Today, they are tools for bartenders, used to wipe down surfaces, dry glassware, and keep their hands clean. This small detail highlights how bar traditions have shifted over time. What began as a shared convenience for customers has evolved into a professional tool behind the bar, showing how even the simplest habits of the Old West were reshaped as taverns modernized. Number 12. Same-sex relationships were common among cowboys. Life in the Old West often took place in male-dominated environments, especially among cowboys, miners, and ranch hands who spent long stretches of time together on the frontier. In these settings, same-sex relationships were not unusual. Evidence also points to the existence of same-sex unions on the frontier. These were not framed in the legal terms of modern marriage, but accounts show that partnerships between men could be acknowledged and even respected by their peers. Most importantly, these relationships did not carry the same social stigma in the West that later periods of American history impose. Within frontier society, where survival, companionship, and trust mattered most, such partnerships were often accepted and integrated into daily life. This perspective challenges modern assumptions about the Old West. It reminds us that frontier culture was shaped not only by rugged individualism, but also by diverse human relationships that were more fluidly recognized than many realize today. Number 13. Bank heists weren't as popular as Hollywood makes them seem. Contrary to Hollywood's portrayal, bank robberies were extremely uncommon in the Old West. Films often depict outlaws bursting into frontier banks, but historical evidence shows that such events happened only a handful of times during the roughly 30-year Wild West period. Researchers estimate that fewer than 10 major bank robberies occurred across the entire frontier era. Considering the number of towns and banks spread across the West, the actual risk was surprisingly low. For comparison, a modern city such as Dayton, Ohio, records more bank robberies in a single year than occurred during the whole span of the Old West. This sharp contrast reveals how storytelling has amplified a rare occurrence into a defining myth. In reality, banks were far more secure than saloons or stagecoaches, and most frontier towns focused daily life on farming, trade, and community, far removed from the cinematic image of constant holdups. Number 14. A famed robber was also pretty honorable. Black Bart remains one of the most unusual figures among Old West outlaws. Unlike many who gained notoriety through force or intimidation, he earned a reputation for his calm, almost gentlemanly approach. On more than one occasion, witnesses described his behavior as polite. In one stagecoach incident, he reportedly declined to take a woman's personal belongings, choosing instead to collect only the funds belonging to Wells Fargo. This curious detail set him apart, reinforcing the image of a man who seemed to draw a line between personal hardship and corporate wealth. Before his life on the frontier took this turn, Black Bart, whose real name was Charles E. Bowles, tried his hand at gold mining in California. Like many who joined the rush, he hoped to find prosperity in the earth. But when success eluded him, he shifted paths, turning his attention to stagecoaches that carried the earnings of banks and businesses. Over the span of less than 10 years, historians estimate that he acquired about $18,000 from Wells Fargo shipments. While the amount may not seem immense today, in the late 19th century it represented a significant sum equivalent to several $100,000 in modern value. What stands out most in his story is his unusual restraint. Records suggest that he never directly took from passengers, focusing instead on the bank shipments. This detail fueled the perception of him as a gentleman bandit, someone who operated within his own moral code, however unconventional it might have been. Ultimately, he was captured and confessed to his role in the thefts. Yet even in legal proceedings, accounts describe him as courteous and composed. His legacy is less about lawlessness and more about the paradox of a man who, while living outside the law, carried himself with dignity and restraint. Number 15, 1 in 4 cowboys was black. Historians now estimate that about 1 in 4 cowboys in the Old West were African American. In Texas especially, records suggest that roughly 25% of working cowhands were black. Many were formerly enslaved individuals who transitioned into ranching life after emancipation, bringing with them valuable skills in farming and animal care. Often called the forgotten cowboys, these men played a crucial role in daily ranch operations. They were frequently tasked with demanding work, such as breaking horses and preparing them for use each morning. They were also relied upon during cattle drives. For example, African American cowboys were sometimes sent ahead to test river crossings and determine whether a trail was safe for the herd. Although rarely depicted in popular culture, their presence was central to the development of cowboy life. By recognizing their contributions, we gain a more accurate and inclusive understanding of what the American frontier truly looked like. So there you have it, 15 facts about the Old West that turned out to be pure myth. The frontier wasn't nearly as wild, lawless, or legendary as Hollywood would have us believe, and the truth is often even more fascinating than the fiction. Which of these myths surprised you the most? Drop a comment below and let me know which Old West story or character you'd like to see uncovered next. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another dive into the real history behind America's frontier legends.